Picture this. Someone makes an offhand comment. A coworker, a stranger, someone you barely know, and it's nothing. It's a throwaway line. And yet 3 hours later, you're still in it, replaying it, reanalyzing it, wondering what they meant, what they think of you, whether everyone else in the room noticed. And the strangest part, you know it shouldn't matter. You know this person's opinion has zero actual weight in your life, and still, you can't let it go. Here's what's fascinating about that. Most people assume this is a confidence problem, a self-esteem problem, something that evolved, people have already fixed, and you just haven't gotten there yet. But that framing misses almost everything important about what's actually happening. Because the reason you care, the reason almost every human being who has ever lived has cared, often desperately, has almost nothing to do with confidence. It has everything to do with how your brain was built, what it was built for, and the gap between the world you were wired to survive in and the world you're actually living in. By the end of this, you won't just understand why you do this. You'll have the only framework that actually makes it easier to stop. What nobody tells you is that the part of your brain processing social rejection fires in the same neural regions that process physical pain, the same region, which means when someone judges you, your brain isn't being dramatic. It's treating a threat to your belonging the same way it treats a threat to your body, because for most of human history, those two things were identical. Think about what life looked like for the overwhelming majority of human existence. You were born into a group. You hunted with that group, ate with that group, slept within reach of that group, and if that group rejected you, if you were cast out, excluded, deemed not worth keeping, you died. Maybe not immediately, but the math was brutal. Alone in a pre-modern environment, you didn't last long, which means natural selection didn't favor people who could shrug off social disapproval. It obliterated them. What survived, what got passed down through hundreds of thousands of years, was a nervous system acutely, almost obsessively tuned to the social environment, one that treated other people's opinions as survival information. And here's the piece that most people miss entirely. This system doesn't just run in the background, it runs first. Before logic, before perspective, before the part of you that knows rationally that one person's passing comment doesn't define your worth. The threat detection goes live immediately, automatically, the way your hand pulls back from heat before you've consciously processed that something is hot. By the time your rational mind starts composing a reasoned response, your nervous system has already classified the situation as a social threat and begun mobilizing accordingly. You're not failing to think clearly. You're thinking clearly inside a system that already sounded the alarm. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and this is the part I want you to stay with, because understanding the mechanism doesn't just explain the behavior. It starts to dissolve the shame around it. Most of the time when we care too much what others think, we're not doing it because we're insecure in some fundamental fixed way. We're doing it because we have an extremely efficient, extremely ancient threat detection system, and it is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem isn't the system. The problem is that it hasn't gotten the update. It doesn't know you don't live in a small tribe anymore. It doesn't know that the coworker who looked at you sideways isn't the person deciding whether to feed you this winter. It's running software that was written for a completely different operating environment, and it's running it at full power. This distinction matters more than it might seem, because there's a specific pattern that emerges when people don't understand this. They fight the reaction itself. They try to not care through willpower. They tell themselves they should be above this. And then when the feeling comes back anyway, which it will, because you cannot white-knuckle your way out of a neurological process, they take that as evidence that something is wrong with it. The caring becomes proof of brokenness, which makes the whole thing worse because now you're ashamed of a completely normal human response, which means you're even more vigilant about how others perceive you, which means the system gets louder, not quieter. This is the loop, and most people spend years trapped in it. What's your relationship with that loop? What's the thing people might think about you that you most desperately want to avoid? Think about that for a second, because the answer usually tells you more about your core fears than almost anything else. Drop it in the comments if you're willing. You might be surprised how many other people share the exact same one. So if willpower isn't the answer, what is? Let's talk about the actual mechanism of change, because there is one. And it's not what most advice about this gets to. It starts with something called the default mode network. This is the part of your brain that activates when you're not focused on an external task. And one of its primary jobs is social cognition, specifically thinking about what other people think about you. When your mind wanders, it often wanders here, not randomly, but because your brain considers this important background maintenance. It's modeling other people's mental states, trying to predict social outcomes, running simulations of how you're perceived. This is not pathological. This is your brain doing its job. But for some people, particularly those who grew up in environments where social approval was unpredictable, where love felt conditional, where small missteps had big consequences, this system got calibrated to run hotter, more frequently, with higher baseline threat sensitivity. And again, that calibration made sense in context. It was adaptive. It helped you navigate a specific environment. The issue is when you carry that calibration into a completely different life. Here's where identity enters the picture, and this is the part I want you to pay close attention to because most self-help skips this entirely. Beneath the behavior, beneath the overthinking, and the replaying, and the anxious monitoring of other people's reactions, there's usually a story you're carrying about who you are. Something like, I am someone who needs to be liked to be okay. Or, my value is contingent on what others think of me. Or, the real me, if fully seen, would not be enough. And this isn't a story you consciously chose. It was written for you, early, by experiences that taught you what it meant to be safe, to belong, to be acceptable. But here's the thing about stories. They run like software, and you are not your software. You are the one who can update it. If this is already landing, if you're recognizing something in yourself that you couldn't quite name before, save this video because the next part is where the actual shift happens. The psychological research on this is genuinely striking. Studies on what's called sociometer theory, developed by psychologist Mark Leary, suggest that self-esteem isn't really about how good you feel about yourself in isolation. It's a monitoring system, a gauge that tracks your current standing in the social environment, which means low self-esteem in this framework is often just your brain signaling that it perceives your social standing as uncertain or threatened. It's not a character flaw, it's a meter reading, and meters can be recalibrated. What this means practically is that the goal isn't to stop caring about people entirely. That would be both impossible and undesirable. Human connection is real, belonging matters, other people's experiences of us carry genuine information. The goal is to stop treating every social signal as a verdict, to develop what researchers call self-concept clarity, a stable enough internal sense of who you are that you can take in feedback without being flattened by it. People with high self-concept clarity don't care less. They just don't need every interaction to confirm their worth. They already have a working answer to that question. And that answer didn't come from approval. It came from somewhere more durable. From their own values, their own behavior, their own relationship with themselves. This is the actual destination. Not indifference, groundedness, but recalibration doesn't happen through thinking your way out. This is the crucial piece. The neural pathways that drive this kind of anxious social monitoring were laid down through experience, through repeated emotional learning, often very early, and they get updated the same way, through new experiences, specifically through what researchers call disconfirmatory evidence. Situations where you risk being seen and find out the consequences aren't what your nervous system predicted, where you say the unpopular thing and the relationship survives, where you fail publicly and the world doesn't end, where you stop performing and discover that who you actually are is enough. Every time this happens, the threat system gets a small update. Not a dramatic transformation, a small update. And those updates accumulate. Over time, the baseline shifts. There's a specific practice that accelerates this, and it's almost counterintuitive. Not exposure to judgment, but selective expansion of what you're willing to let be seen. Not reckless oversharing, strategic authenticity, small acts of being genuinely yourself in situations where you've historically performed a version of yourself you thought would be better received. Saying the honest thing instead of the agreeable one. Letting someone see you uncertain instead of pretending confidence you don't feel. Being interested instead of interesting. Each of these small departures from performance gives your nervous system new data. Slowly, a different story about what happens when you're fully yourself begins to write itself. Not because someone told you to believe it, but because you lived it. And there's a compounding effect here that the research supports. As you accumulate these experiences of being seen and surviving, being seen and thriving, The threat system's sensitivity slowly shifts. It doesn't disappear, it recalibrates. The alarm doesn't go off as early, doesn't ring as loud, doesn't last as long. Not because you forced it to be quiet, but because you gave it enough evidence to lower the threat assessment. You literally rewired the response through experience. That's neuroplasticity, not philosophy. Here's the other piece, the one that tends to surprise people. The more you monitor others' reactions to you, the less accurately you perceive them. This is well documented. When we're anxious about social judgment, we tend to overestimate how much people are focused on us, how negative their assessments are, and how long those assessments last. The spotlight effect, the cognitive bias where we believe others are watching and evaluating us far more than they actually are, is one of the most robust findings in social psychology. The person you're worried about has moved on. They've thought about their own lunch, their own stress, their own quiet fears about what others think of them. You are not the center of their awareness the way they are the center of yours. Which brings us to the final reframe, and this one matters. The energy you spend monitoring how others perceive you is energy that could be directed toward actually living. Every hour the threat system runs hot, scanning, analyzing, adjusting, performing, is an hour of real cognitive and emotional bandwidth not available for creating, connecting, building, resting. Caring too much what others think isn't just emotionally exhausting, it's expensive. It has a real cost in the quality and depth of your actual life. And when you zoom out and look at the pattern over years, all the things not said, not tried, not risked because the potential judgment felt too heavy, the cost becomes staggering. Not in a shameful way, in a clarifying one, because you can see exactly what's been running in the background, eating the resources that could have gone somewhere else. And you can decide right now that you're going to start redirecting them. Not perfectly, not overnight, but deliberately. You are not a person who is too sensitive, too insecure, too fragile. You are a person with a threat detection system that hasn't received the update that the world changed. That system kept you safe when you needed it. It ran the calibration that made sense for the environment you were in. And in a very real sense, it worked. It got you here. But you don't live in that environment anymore, and you are not required to keep living as though you do. The patterns that protected you once don't have to run your life forever. Recognizing that isn't rejection of your past. It's the beginning of something better. That's not a pep talk, that's the science. The system that made this pattern is plastic, meaning it can be rewired not through willpower or positive thinking, but through accumulated evidence gathered from a life where you risk being seen and survive it, maybe even flourish in it. This is where it starts, not with a grand transformation, with one small act of being a little more genuinely yourself than you were yesterday, and then another, and then another. Each one a small vote for a different story about who you are and what you need to be safe in the world. If this shifted something for you, even slightly, subscribe, because this channel exists to go deep on exactly this kind of work. Not surface advice, the actual mechanism. See you in the next one.